Bob likes to play bingo with his local church. So he gets together with the other parishioners Saturday night. They play a good game of bingo. They have a lot of fun. One night, Bob wins bingo. Bingo, he wins. And the pastor comes to him and says, "You win, Bob." And he gives him his prize. Now, it's not a real fancy prize. They don't have a lot of money. They're just token gifts. They're kind of gag gifts. And Bob says, "What's this?" And the pastor says, "Why, Bob, that's a toilet brush. You win a toilet brush tonight for winning bingo. Use it in good health." And Bob says, well, all right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. A week goes by. Bob comes to church. The pastor sees him. He grins. He goes over, puts his arm around his shoulder and says, "Hey, Bob, how's that toilet brush working out for you?" And Bob says, "Well, no, it's, yeah, it's great. But, I think really I'm going to go back to just using regular toilet paper." How to tell a story. I'm a member of the Utah Storytelling Guild. I'm president of the Farmington Bay chapter. Tell a lot of stories. People ask me to come and tell stories for different occasions, parties, programs, entertainment at corporate events. So I tell a lot of stories. People ask me, what are your tips for telling a good story? And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. Okay. Step number 1, never say okay. Never start your story with okay. Okay? Okay. So why do you need to learn to tell storytelling anyway? Maybe you're not going to join a storyteller guild like I have. All information is a story. Whether you're telling about electronic pieces and new computer gadgets, how to fix your yard or work in your garden, your information is a story. Well, or at least it should be a story. If you want it to be received by your listener in a way they'll remember, it needs to be a story. If you're telling people about your life is a story. So you're going to learn to tell a story so that your communication improves. The first thing you need to do to learn to tell a story is use a good voice. A lot of people will say, "Well, I have a timid voice." Baloney. Give you a good example. I was at a meeting where somebody came in from another state to present some powerful information. It was in a room with an echoey, everything was really echoey in this room. They gave him a microphone. And he held the microphone down here at his waist level. And no one could hear him. And somebody had to interrupt him and go, hey, hold the microphone up here by your mouth. And the man said, "I don't like microphones." Terrible excuse. If you're going to speak, and in a case where you're going to use a tool like a microphone, that's all a microphone is a tool. I hate to hear the sound of my own voice. Get over it. If you're going to open your mouth and speak, get over not liking how your voice sounds. If you're going to use a microphone, if somebody gives you a microphone, hold it up to your mouth and talk into it. And you can't say, "Well, I don't like microphones." It's just a tool. It's like having somebody ask you to help them with some carpentry and say, "Well, I don't like hammers." No, it's just a tool. It's a tool and you use it for what it is. So then this man started talking into the microphone. He begrudgingly held it up, and his voice got more and more quiet. And they tried turning up the volume on the microphone until it squealed because it was too loud. And they said, we can't hear what you're saying. You got to use a big voice. And he said, "Well, this is just how I talk." Terrible excuse. If you're going to tell a story, if you're going to say anything to a group of people, you've got to use your body and use a big voice. Everybody needs to be able to hear you. Now, step number next, talk to your audience. Look them in the eye. Don't be afraid. Don't try to look over their heads. Don't try to look off in the distance. Look at your audience, okay? You're breaking the fourth wall. In a play, sometimes, or even in a movie, once in a while they break the fourth wall and they speak to the audience for effect, for comic effect. Well, you're not in a play and you're not in a movie. You're speaking directly to the audience. So you look directly at your audience. But you're also at the same time, and this is step number next, you are in a play. You're an actor. You're the scenery. You're the sound effects. You're all the characters. So when you talk about that really tall building, you need to look up and see that really tall building. And when you talk about the birdie in the tree, you need to show how delicate that birdie appears, and you need to do what they call stage whispering. People still need to be able to hear you, but the birdie is delicate and quiet. If somebody makes you happy, you tell your story with a big smile. If it's sad, you be kind of serious. So you're the stage, you're the scenery, you're the sound effects. If the person that you're talking about is coming from a distance, you can see them off in the distance. You're acting out your story, not just telling it. Step number next, that probably should have been a couple steps before, but now that you've got going, you've got a story, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Don't say or Even if I do it, that doesn't make it right for you to do. If you can't think of what you're going to say next, pause. Nothing wrong with that. Pause, regroup, think about what you're trying to say, and go on. Don't say or That's really important. So your story has to have a powerful beginning. We said at the very beginning of this, never start with okay. Just launch. When it's time to talk, you stand up. Let's say we're giving a story about your high school. And it was a green building, they called it the Green Monster. Here's an example of how you start. You don't say you don't say okay, I'm ready. You just walk in like this. You look at your audience. The Green Monster, that's what we called it. It was a building where I went to high school. You just launch into your story. Now, all of this talk about how to tell your story is going to do you no good if you don't already have stories to tell. Where are you going to find stories? Well, if you want stories, traditional classic stories, fairy tales, legends, histories, library, internet, you can find them, print them out, memorize them if you choose to memorize them. You can put them in your own words, which is my favorite way to hear a story. It's the best way to hear a story. If you know it, then you'll tell it in your own words. You don't necessarily have to memorize it word for word. The second way, if you're going to tell stories about life around you, about things that happen, stories about your life, is to be present, to be focused, to be aware. It's like when somebody in your family is expecting a baby. Suddenly it seems like you see pregnant women everywhere. Did they really appear out of nowhere? No. It's the same thing if your dad buys a red Volkswagen. Suddenly you see red Volkswagens everywhere. Where were these red Volkswagens before? They were there, you just didn't notice them. You're present now because you have a connection. So if you are present and noticing things that happen, people will tell me all the time, nothing ever happens to me. I don't have anything to tell stories about. And that's not true. Things happen to you all the time. The only difference between you and me, if you're not telling stories, is that I just have a big mouth. I notice things happen around me, and I tell stories about them. So be present. And the last part of it is listen to other people talk. Listen to them tell stories about their own life, and then steal those stories. I do that all the time. I steal people's stories all the time and tell them as if they happen to me. People tell wonderful stories about encounters they have with their neighbors, about something funny that happened with the mailman, and I steal it, embellish it, enlarge it, tell it myself. And you listen, and a good example of that is a famous story told by Bill Clinton. Now, listening to other people talk and tell stories means being polite and being respectful. He tells the story of how he loved getting together with his family, uncles and aunts and other people, and listen for example, I think he was talking about a Sunday dinner, and listening to them tell stories. And he was a young child, and he was listening to these wonderful stories being told by family members, and an uncle said to him, Billy, would you like to tell a story? And he said, yeah, I would. He says, okay, you can, if you can tell me what Aunt Sue's story was about. She was the last one that told a story. If you can tell me what her story was about, then it'll be your turn to tell a story. And he said, well, I don't know. And so his uncle said, well, then you're not ready to be a part of our storytelling night. When you can tell me what the last person who was talking, what they were talking about, then you're ready to participate and tell a story. So listening politely is my last step of how to tell a story. Now, quickly, the last part is the story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning I told you about, how don't say crazy things, just launch. Have a middle. How do you find the middle? How do you work out the middle? Practice, practice, practice. Tell your mom, tell your dog, tell your brother, tell your friend. Tell it in the mirror, tell it to a camera. Tell your story and story and story and story. And you'll become familiar with it, and then you'll have your middle. And if you practice it also that much, you'll find your ending, because the story's not a good story if it doesn't have a good ending. And a powerful, hit 'em hard ending is what makes a story great. And you'll find it if you'll practice it. So you practice, practice, practice. You don't have to memorize it. Just learn to tell it in your own words and tell it to whoever listens. But that practice will make you a good speaker, and it'll make you capable when you have information that you need to share with other people. Good luck telling stories.